Welcome back to another Cables in 4K. Today we're going to talk about the LETSHUOER LR-Nebula cable. So that is this guy on the left side in a bright copper color. This one was actually shipped to me with Cadenza 4, so I do thank LETSHUOER for sending both of those at the same time. So I thought it would be a good opportunity to talk about the cable while I am listening to the Cadenza 4. So on the right side, we actually do have the Cadenza 4 stock cable, which is actually super nice as well. And below it, this black case is the familiar LETSHUOER modern case that they've delivered with S15, with the Cadenza 4, and also with Nebula cable. So inside of this box is basically the black case that you see down there. So on the paper, we have some of the marketing points that LETSHUOER would like to talk about that's on their website. So let's kind of walk through a couple of their points and talk about the meaning behind them. So first, we've got Taiwanese 6N monocrystalline copper strands, right? So you typically don't see regional designations on copper. When it's imported, you tend to. So this one happens to be Taiwanese. Sometimes you will see Japanese or Furukawa copper, and other times it's probably just domestic copper. So a little step up in quality is how they would say that from Taiwanese, and then there's a kind of a step up to Japanese. So Taiwanese kind of right in the middle of that. 6N is the number of nines in the purity, so 6Ns is better than 5Ns, which isn't as good as 7Ns, but 6N is a pretty nice number. And monocrystalline copper, sometimes you see that maybe spelled out as single crystal copper, but I think that's just their fancy name for it. Then we have soft steel memory ear hooks, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But they also talk about the proprietary silver infused solder blend. So when you see cables and they talk about the solder blends, or you request proprietary, or not proprietary, but upgraded solder for your cables, your custom cables, that's kind of what they're talking about. They're just going, I think LETSHUOER happens to put together lots of cables over the years. They probably have a proprietary blend that they prefer that has a low failure rate and kind of a high QA/QC number. So I think over the years they've come up with something that they like, and I think it's kind of an interesting thing to point out on their website and as a marketing point. So that is kind of what's going on their website, and you can also see that this one goes for about $165. So as I said, we'll quickly go through this one. This is the Cadenza 4 cable. This one is very much like your typical upgrade cable that you might find. It's actually a high quality cable. I like it very much. It feels very much like your typical cable that you might buy on AliExpress, but they did it in 2 cores with a L-type modular. So L-type modular, which is actually pretty cool. That's my favorite type of modular. But the material itself, this SPC version, with the slightly, I call it slightly sticky. It tends to stick to itself. So if you throw this on your desk and pick it up, it tends to be a little bit more tangly than I would say Nebula is. And that's a lot of it just because of the material they use. It tends to be a little bit softer, so it feels better in your hand. But when you put it on your desk and pick it up, it tends to be a little bit more tangly, kind of like this. And it's probably not that tangly. It doesn't turn into a ball, but the material itself tends to be just a little bit stickier within the strands, and I think it does. If you throw it on your desk like that, it tends to behave exactly like that. Whereas the Nebula, I think, is a harder style insulation, so you don't notice that as much. And at the same time, perhaps it feels a little stiffer in hand, or maybe it's a little springier, I guess is how I would say it. But this is a 4.4. This is not modular, so that is a straight 4.4. On the bottom, we actually have this 2-core, which is actually, it's a bright, very attractive looking bright copper. And then that kind of goes right into a split, which is a little bit bigger than what I was expecting, but it's not too bad. So this split, it's a little bit bigger. If we look at the one that's on the stock Cadenza cable, you can kind of see what I'm talking about. So they put a really nice, cute, small split on the Cadenza cable. And on this one, we get kind of a chunkier, and perhaps that's because they were merging this cable with these 2 smaller cables, so maybe they need a little bit more space, but not too bad. It's aluminum, so it's lightweight. You don't really notice it as much anyway, but then we've got a kind of a slider, which doesn't slide, chin slider, which is kind of slides, but a little bit sticky, so I wouldn't play with that too much. But it's definitely functional. it's definitely not stuck in place, and you can, the more you work it, the looser it gets. So I think that'll be fine. But that's the way the two fit together there. And then as we work our way up through this, so these are 2 strands. These are, again, as I said, 2 smaller strands. At the bottom is 2 thicker strands. Then that splits into this finer braid up here. Same color, just thinner ear hooks. And again, I think some people are going to be more attracted to very thin ear hooks, or having cables that go around your ear in a very thin, lightweight style like this. Some people don't like chunky things wrapped around your ear. That tends to be more noticeable and rub a little bit on your ear. So I think they did a really good job of putting together a complete cable that's sort of lightweight and thinner than what you would typically find. And I think that's going to be one of the selling points that they didn't necessarily talk about. So what they did talk about was the memory wire. And that, you can kind of see that silver wire right there. So this is a thing that used to show up in cables years ago, and it sort of got phased out with the preformed ear hooks. But what it really means is it's literally what it says. You have a memory hook in it. So you can bend the ear hook to how you want it, kind of within a limited range, but it tends to remember how you had it bent, and as opposed to a ear hook, a preformed ear hook, which looks kind of like this. And you can bend it out of place and it kind of snaps right back in place. So that is not what happens here. You bend it and it kind of stays that way, or you can bend it straight or whatever angle you want. So one of those things that hasn't been around for a couple of years, and it's kind of interesting that they brought it back for this particular cable. But again, I think this is something that people aren't really used to. Some people will be very much attracted to having the memory wire back. Some people remember years ago cutting out the memory wires like I do. But yeah, I thought it was super interesting. When I saw it in the case, I was like, wow, they actually brought back the memory wire. I haven't seen one in years. So very cool that they did that. And again, I think the selling point on this one, the thing that they really didn't mention a whole lot is really the weight of it and the thickness of it. You know, this thin style cable is something that you don't find all that often anymore. And I think to put a high quality material into a thinner, lightweight cable, I think that is actually a part of the cable market that isn't really addressed all that often. We tend to get more of this style, and this is a 2-core, so this is, I would call this a medium weight cable. You know, typically if you get an upgrade cable in the same material, it's going to be 4 cables, so it's going to be a little chunkier, a little bit heavier, and that's kind of exactly the most popular style that you would see today. Whereas the Nebula, very much thinner, lighter, very much for kind of a different person who really prefers a lighter weight cable. So pretty cool. If you actually happen to have a Cadenza, you know, you have a choice of, you don't have a choice. This one costs you $165. This one comes with it, but you kind of get what I'm saying. It's kind of nice that they are addressing a part of the market that isn't often addressed. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and I will see you next time.